you understand the role that heavy lifters play in the future, and when you start looking at a 30-year time frame, and the metro in the main will service areas of Sydney that are not served at the moment. When you have a look at the situation we're dealing with in New South Wales, we double our population approximately every 50 years. It's not hard to envisage a city of 8 to 10 million by the middle of this century. In 100 years, the question is, what sort of transport infrastructure would you want to see in your city at the middle of the century? They start with the heavy lifters about where they ought to be located and what sort of network that you need. The road network's got a particular role to play. When you look at the bus systems that we put there, the ones that are easier adjust over a period of time, they tend to be an early indicator for us about where the mass transit systems are required. If you go to the trouble of having a look at the bus network in Sydney and colour-code it out of the major centres, you can get yourself a real good indicator of where your mass transit systems will be required in the future. Metro and the sequence of events that you need to develop them in, and the heavy rail system and all of that sort of thing, as I say, only makes sense from the big picture. You start with an outcome 30 years down the track, you have a look at what you've got now, you decide what's the best sequence to get there, how you get the best synergies for your investment along the way. You need to create an environment where every investment decision that you make is compatible with that 30-year outcome. You need to keep in mind what the community wants and needs for us to grow economically. You've got your social objectives, the equity issues in needing to deal with the disadvantage in our community. You've got some environmental outcomes. If you can get that link between planning and land use, and particularly the heavy lifters right, you can do some significant good as far as the climate change issues and the environmental outcomes that you need as well. But you need to do the strategic planning right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's your last chance to ask questions for the afternoon, so I'll throw it out there. I think Larry has the microphone. Robert Peck.
Les, Robert Peck from Peck von Hartel. We operate in every state and territory, and it's quite markedly different in each state and territory as to the reaction we get from governments and public services on infrastructure. John's comments in relation to infrastructure in Victoria could have been delivered by any 4 or 5 economic ministers of cabinet. They would have said the same thing. John's own boss, the planning boss, would have said the same sort of thing. And importantly, the third level bureaucrat in Victoria would have the same line, because they've got a lot of shared outcomes. One of the outcomes for the Kennett government was that he's driven this through most of the government agencies in Victoria. We're very conscious that you've inherited at best, a dismembered public service who's taken the brunt of a lot of criticism over the years, wrongly in the main. With the new mega departments, how do you see this coming together under your management of what is effectively 1/3 of Australia in economic terms to achieve the outcomes that you sort of just outlined?
Well, there's a couple of ways you need to have a look at this when you do it. If you're talking about how are we going to get the coordinated outcomes and how are we going to get the strategy the way forward is to consider the like functions that are occurring in different agencies, bringing them together into a single point, setting some objectives for them and making them work together in an integrated way to get the outcomes that you're after. The theory's simple. The practicalities of doing it in a public service environment is possible, but it takes time. We don't have time. We're going to move on it quickly. That's our intention. You can't just do the reform process and nothing else. You've got to keep the business of the day running at the same time. You've got to start making the new things happen. My view is we take the Navy approach. You don't leave the ship in the dockyard getting all the repairs done. It takes forever. Send it out to sea, get your own troops to fix it. And we'll get things started. We've stuck the Transport Coordination Group in the Transport Management Centre the week I started into the new job. We have to take that sort of approach. You get these narrow windows to get things done. And we're underway with the transport planning process. We're shifting people into consolidated areas. We're doing the rationalisations that will be needed. The model's been given to us. It's our job now to get on with it.
Down the middle aisle.
Thanks, Chris. Brian Negus, RACV, Victoria. John talked about how we get the next PPPs up, and I've been pretty buoyed by some of the optimism that's been in the room this morning, especially about sort of the ability or the desire for many in the private sector, in fact, to get back into toll roads, into traffic risk, maybe in a different structure than in the past, not so aggressive as was said. And in Melbourne, John's talked about the situation of availability charges on Penlink, potential link. The diesel plant got talked about this morning with government underpinning finance a bit, so a different model again, and toll roads in the past. I guess, for the panel, how do we actually go about getting the next PPPs up? Victoria's got a couple of critical gaps in the freeway network, for example, and there's the Metropolitan Underground Rail link, which in fact could be maybe a PPP of a different sort with value capture. But the other two, the two North-East Link and East-West Link on the freeway system could maybe be PPPs under a new model. So how do we get that new model up in PPPs, and how do we actually leverage on the optimism in the room this morning about actually a bit of desire for getting back into the traffic risk scenario?
Let's have a go first to that. Does desal signal that the private sector's back and they're ready to go forward?
I guess the question is, have they gone? There's a lot of stuff happening out there, and I just look in the Queensland situation. We've got two big toll roads. One's about to come to be completed. One's well and truly underway with Airport Link. We've got a massive PPP, well, not massive, but a fairly large PPP with a rapid transit project happening down the Gold Coast. We continually assess our projects against those models, and I just think it's something you just need to keep moving. I'm very, very optimistic about where we go, and I think that'll continue to happen.
I think Chris Lynch actually answered a lot of it this morning when he said really Transurban's prepared to take the traffic risk out there. It was actually an interesting discussion, and I'm not sure whether I'm sharing this out of confidence, but when they spoke to me about Penlink, they said, well, really, that's not our business. Our business is to go for projects where we can really grow our revenue business rather than a more traditional procurement with a quasi sort of debt financing or loan availability. I mean, in terms of the two Melbourne projects, we actually have to do more to define them. That's underway now. They're obviously both fairly big numbers, and that's going to require obviously some significant